I somehow watched a good movie.
T-minus 10, 9, 8.
Good morning. We are all very excited to be here today. This really is a new first step for mankind.
I would hope we keep looking for the answers to those really tough questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? And are we alone?
Europa Report is a science fiction found footage thriller about the first manned expedition to the moon of Jupiter, Europa, in the search for life.
Is it go?
Our craft was heading for a moon of Jupiter, known as Europa.
And just like every other movie with that premise, everything goes wrong.
Oxygen is flowing, we're good.
Commencing egress. This navigate zone.
Prep for orbital transfer? We are clear of Jupiter's orbit.
Pitching for power descent. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on. Here we go.
I can't believe I'm here. This is incredible.
Europa Report is one of those movies that I haven't really heard that much about. I've heard a couple websites give it kind of lukewarm reviews, and I know that I knew beforehand that Sharto Copley was the star or one of the actors in it. If you don't know who Sharto Copley is, he's the guy who starred in District 9. I'm really into him. He's one of those genuine actors that it feels like he's actually giving a shit on screen. But I hadn't really heard a lot about this movie until I watched the trailer, and I decided, you know, I'll give it a shot, and this movie turned out to be really fucking good.
Let's go for a swim. You hear that?
Are you guys seeing this? It's beautiful.
Come back to the ship now.
I want to see if it's reacting to my lights. I'm going to turn them off.
This movie, it's gripping, it's really suspenseful, it has a great feeling of kind of this existential dread to everything, and it constantly kept me guessing. It constantly kept me wondering what was going to happen next. And I didn't really know what the whole plot was as the film was progressing. I wouldn't really know where this was going, what the last, movement of the film would be. And usually with most movies, you can kind of tell halfway through, okay, this is going to end like this. In this film, it kept me guessing all the way through. And you don't see that a lot anymore. You don't see that in science fiction or even like normal suspense or mystery films anymore. You kind of get where everything's going to go right away. And with this movie, it kept throwing me for a loop. It kept me guessing, and I really liked that. This thing it's incredibly well made. You can tell they really put a lot of detail into the production design, the look of the film, keeping everything consistent, everything very kind of locked down in a sense. There's a lot of cool ideas in here, and it's because this movie has a real accurate sense of science. NASA helped them develop the script, and the script is really good. It's really smart, and it keeps coming up with these really cool, new, interesting ideas, and all of it is really believable. It's all very practical, and that was one of the things that I really loved about this movie, is that it all felt plausible. It all felt like this could be something that scientists or astronauts could be doing in 20 years from now. It feels very real, very just as I said, locked down, realistic, simple. It kind of has a very straightforward plot, but not really, because structurally it keeps kind of jumping around between. This mission is a year and some months, and it keeps jumping around between this event that happens at the 6-month point and then everything that's happening now in the mission. And at first I didn't really get that. I didn't really understand what was going on. And then eventually I was like, okay, I get where this is going. And basically it shows you that like now everyone's like, they're pissed off at each other, they are in a bad mood, or they feel torn up, they feel like they're in some sort of like crisis, existentially, emotionally, what have you, and then you'll go back to the 6 months and you'll see like, okay, that happened and that happened. You get kind of a sense of why, and so you kind of, in a sense, the mission is kind of fucked from the beginning, and things kind of start going wrong from the beginning, and I liked that in a way. You can really tell, and not exclusively from Sharto Copley, but basically from every actor in this movie, that they're really trying here. They're really trying to put in a good performance here. I think we're gonna give a little bit of credit to Neil deGrasse Tyson on this one too, because he's in this movie. He's a clip of him is in this movie. The famous "I want to go ice fishing on Europa" clip is in this movie. And you know, you gotta give any movie that has a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson just like 5 extra points just for that, I think. This is a suspense film. This is a bit of like a horror monster movie. At least it has little brushes with those kind of genres. The deaths in this movie are really unique, and each one is kind of different from the next. And there's a death scene that happens that it's a guy floating out into space, just floating out, and you see it from his perspective, from like the helmet cam, and it's terrifying because something like that, drowning, I'm terrified of that shit. And so that just freaked me out. That death, it bugged the hell out of me, and it made me feel very uneasy for the rest of the film. This movie does, of course, have its faults. As I said, I liked the structure, but I did have my issues with it. I don't necessarily think they needed to do that with the structure, but it works, and it doesn't really change the plot. It doesn't really affect the way in which you get information. But I would like to see a cut of this movie where everything is just linear, just to see how that would play. Some of the complaints I've been reading about this movie is that it's kind of dull and it's very slow paced. And I will agree that is true. But as I've said before, I don't mind that in a film. I don't mind when a movie's kind of dull. I don't mind when a movie is slow. I basically don't mind when a movie gives me the time to think about it as I'm watching it. That's why science fiction movies are typically slow, because it's giving you that time to contemplate what it's showing you while you're seeing it. That definitely has been lost in modern filmmaking. Throughout this movie, it keeps cutting back to these like interview segments with a couple members of like the crew, the people who were behind the project, behind the Europa 1 project. Embeth Davids is one of the people. I haven't seen Embeth Davids in a movie in a while, and in these moments, the movie kind of takes on a faux documentary kind of feeling, and I actually wish it did more of that. There's a movie that came out a couple years ago from Australia called The Tunnel, which is kind of a faux documentary, and I was really impressed by that film that I kind of wanted this movie to be a little bit more like that. This movie reminded me of a lot of other science fiction movies, which, not to be unexpected, science fiction often, same with horror, is a genre that eats itself a lot. One thing is that throughout the entire movie, I kept wondering if this was some sort of a reaction to Prometheus, given that the science is very accurate. The movie is very slow, and there's action, but not a lot of action. And that Prometheus is kind of this mess that doesn't have any logic, that doesn't really have any science, that doesn't really have any sense, that I felt like this movie was kind of like, okay, we're going to kind of take a similar premise, but we're actually going to do it intelligently. And it for some reason, it just kind of felt like this film was a bit of a reaction to Prometheus, a bit of a reaction to how dumb that film was, because Prometheus is a dumb film, let's be honest about it. Good, I think there should be more intelligent science fiction movies that are reactions to dumb films.
What was that black goo?
But best of all, this movie has references to Werner Herzog's The Wild Blue Yonder, which stars Brad Dourif and is one of the most peculiar science fiction alien invasion movies that I've ever seen, and I highly recommend The Wild Blue Yonder. And I highly recommend Europa Report. There's a cool monster at the end if you want to see that.
I always said it was worth the risk.
I gotta get out of this.
Talk to me!
Forgive me.
So if you're a fan of classic, intelligent, slow-burning, but suspenseful, and even a little bit existential science fiction, and you like Neil deGrasse Tyson, watch this movie.
So they bring along a biologist, and the second that they find a dead alien body, instead of being curious about it scientifically, he just wants to run away. It's been dead for 10,000 years. Before sending this biologist out on a 4-year-long space mission, didn't they do some kind of psychological profile on him? The results would have showed that he was some kind of pussy. I have to take a psychological profile test when I apply for a job at Target.